Today we're going to be talking about kids and lying. And I know this has come up plenty in my own home, and it's something that parents ask about. Good morning.
Morning.
There we go. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you beautifully.
Awesome. Okay, there we go. We are live.
There's questions
Okay,
already.
alrighty. So, yeah, I have a feeling this might be a big one. And it was interesting because I saw a really beautiful reel about this actually yesterday from another account. And I can't remember the account, but I was like, absolutely. This so brought up some really good points. And parents get really worried about this one from what I've seen in my practice, and it comes up on social. So unfortunately, I know some comments or questions are coming in where today we can only talk about, we're just talking about lying today. So we try to cover as many topics as possible, but feel free to follow our podcast, the Child Psych Podcast. This will actually be added to our podcast as a mini episode soon, so people can join in that way as well.
Yeah, and if you have a topic you really want us to cover, just message us. And if it feels like something that would be appropriate to lots of different people, we're more than happy to cover it.
Absolutely. So I saw some questions come up with like trauma and loss, and I'm like, well, that's a whole nother discussion. And please understand, the Institute of Child Psychology has a ton of courses on how to help kids with this stuff. Like, we don't just do social media. That's just something we kind of do on the side, but that we have lots of actually trauma courses, because I see that's coming in. So I don't know, do you want to get started on this, or do you want me to jump in?
Go for it, and then I'll follow from you.
Okay, so what we'll start to see is kids start to lie around 3 years of age. They're fine, like you see this thing come on, and parents are like, oh my gosh, like, was my child a sociopath? Like, why are they lying? Like, they're hiding something, and we get really reactive about this. And I think as a parent, like, I don't, my parents were very reactive to lying too. So I knew that was one of the things that I know I was spanked for, actually. That was my first memory of being spanked, was actually all my memories of being spanked involved lying. So of course, as a parent, this could be a whole nother topic about triggers. Lying was a hard one for me as a parent, because I was come down on very hard for lying. But now we understand more about why kids lie. And there are actually several different reasons. So it's not just one thing. But I think for any of you moms of toddlers and preschoolers, I guess not toddlers, I guess the preschool years, like that cusp of about three and four, 3, 4, we see lying come up. And that is actually developmentally appropriate. So I know everyone's like, but it's not right. I'm like, well, they're learning about morality. Like, that's part of this, is they have to develop that over time, a sense, of consciousness. And but what is happening is they're developing something called theory of mind, where they start to understand that people have thoughts that are different than theirs, that their reality is not the same of someone else's reality. And children are also, so they're playing with this concept, and they're also governed by the rules of play. And so while a child might be like an outcome, they lied that they didn't hit their sister, because kids are very imaginative, what they might be telling you is, I am imagining a world in which I didn't do that thing. So it's almost like kids have this alternate universe, because they have a very strong imagination, and they express themselves through play. Is sometimes that is a wish. Like, I wish it didn't happen that way, and it comes out as a lie.
It's kind of like wishful thinking. Just to kind of tag onto what Tammy's saying here, the way I like to think of theory of mind with our 3-4-year-olds is that really before the age of 3, if you imagine everybody's walking around with speech bubbles above their head, before the age of 3, 3-year-olds believe that everybody's thinking the same thing, that those speech bubbles are identical. After 3 or 4, they start to realize that maybe other people have different things in their speech bubble, different perceptions of what's actually happening. So for example, if before the age of 3, if a kid takes out the granola bars and puts them on the counter, they automatically assume everybody knows that I put the granola bars on the counter. That speech bubble is exactly the same. After the age of 3 or 4, as they start to develop, they start to realize, oh, when mom asks me who put the granola bars on the counter, they may not have the exact same speech bubble above their head. Mom doesn't actually know. And so we start to realize that people have different perceptions, which is absolutely critical in our development of empathy, our development of understanding other. So lying is actually just a bridge to starting to understand that people may have different perceptions. So I love to think about it as speech bubbles at the age of 3.
Yeah. But then what happens, so we see this, and then we start to teach children that, it's important to tell the truth. And I think the biggest roadblock to children telling the truth, and I'll give you guys a narrative about this because I've had to work through this with my stepdaughters. When I first started parenting them, well, step parenting them, as much as you can, be a parent, being a step parent, it takes a lot of time because you're not the main disciplinarian, you're there as more of a support. But it was very obvious to me that my stepdaughters would lie about a lot of things. And these are actually very kind girls. Like they're very kind. And so it's not malicious, but it would be something as silly as like someone spilled a glass of milk and they'd be like, I didn't do that. And I'll like literally have watched them spill the milk, like literally, or hit one another, or like say a word they shouldn't. And I would watch them do it and they would literally look at me and be like, I didn't do it. And I'm like, huh, okay. So then it bridges back to me asking my now husband, if they did that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever this, back, what would have happened? Like what was, and well, I learned there was a lot of yelling in the house for a long time. So of course, like they're averting shame. Like shame comes up, I did something wrong. And so if I lie, then I won't get yelled at.
Mm-hmm.
Or I won't, for some kids, I won't get hit, or I won't get put in a timeout, or I won't,
Yeah.
or all these things. So I think that is another thing we have to consider, that sometimes kids are just experimenting with a new like concept, which is a theory of mind. Sometimes they are telling you, I wish something different happened, but it didn't go that way. And I'm really embarrassed I did that thing,
Mm-hmm.
which, they have that awareness. But also is, what are they trying to avoid?
Totally.
Because that's all we're doing. I'm feeling stress in my body and I did a thing I know that is wrong. I can see the look on your face, mom or dad. Like I did something I shouldn't. And so if I lie, then I'm trying to avoid shame, blame, pain.
Totally lie when they're little. So there was one study where basically they took a whole bunch of 3-4-year-olds and they put a Barney toy behind them and said to them, you may not look at the toy behind you. And then they asked them, did you look at the toy? And basically all of the 3-year-olds said that they didn't look at the toy. But then as I spoke to them more and more, basically all of them ended up mentioning Barney behind them. So what they saw was that basically like 98% of the 3-year-olds lied.
Mm-hmm.
And as they got older, lying continued, but the lies got more and more sophisticated. So what Tammy's saying here as well is that when we come in really harshly and there's a lot of shame, we tend to see that lies tend to bubble up more. And just one more study, it's the last study I'll mention, but one more study, they looked at a school, they looked at different schools and how they treated lying. It was a cross-cultural study. And they found a school in Africa where the kids were beaten for lying, versus a school, I believe it was in North America, where it was much more gentle, that in schools where there was harsh, punitive responses to lying, that what ended up happening is that those kids hid their lies better and in the long term actually lied more because they're so terrified, there's so much shame. And so when we're with our kiddos, we really want to watch whether they're little, whether they're in elementary school, tweens or teens. We really want to be aware of how we're responding to the lies. So I think that's the first thing, is we always want to be aware, first of all, of what our response is.
Okay. Hearing no sound, but I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
So hopefully it's recording okay. Yeah, so being aware of our own reaction as caregivers is going to be big. And then I think, how do we talk to them about this?
Mm-hmm.
So your child has lied, like they have done this thing. And I think the first thing is to just pause and take a breath and remember the things we said. Theory of mind, they're understanding how other people are feeling. They're trying to figure out how other people are thinking. They don't want to get in trouble. There's lots of reasons they do this, okay? And they have to learn from us that this is not okay. But if we react in shame or punish immediately, or probably hopefully we're not hitting or these things, then they're going to start doing it more. And that's the studies Tania's talking about. That's actually going to increase the lying. And so, some of the things I would say to my kiddos when they were, and they don't do this as much anymore, but to be fair, adults lie quite frequently. If we look at the how often adults lie within a day, it's almost on the hour that
Yep.
adults lie. So I always think that's interesting that we peg kids for this, but adults do it. It's just like we call them white lies, like they're little exaggerations, or like I was only 30 minutes late for work when you were like, I don't know, 40 minutes late. Like there's these really small little lies that adults tell regularly. So I just want to, we have to sometimes put that back on us.
Yeah.
But it's just saying, it sounds like you wish. And that's where we talked about the kids use their imagination. The lie is often an expression of something they wish was different, that they wish they didn't do. And I can say to my daughter, you know what I'm hearing? I'm hearing you wish you didn't spill the milk, that you're really embarrassed that that happened.
Mhm.
And that makes a lot of sense because I think you're worried I'm going to be mad that you did that thing. And it's an accident. And accidents happen. I am not mad at you for spilling. So you don't need to, and there's no punishment there. It's just letting her know it's okay. And that's when we got kids lying like this, you have to lay some groundwork here first. So now I understand if it's a regular thing that we may have to look at some consequences, but initially I'm just trying to reduce the shame response as a parent of being
Totally.
like letting them know that I know. Like I
Mhm.
know these things happened and I
Mhm.
can see you're embarrassed and you're so worried I'm going to yell. And then eventually you're consistent over time, they stop lying. Like they realize you're not going to do the thing that maybe happened. Or maybe we say, sweetheart, maybe in the past when you've spilt the milk, because we're just using that as kind of a innocuous case, mom yelled. So it makes a lot of sense that you don't want to own or you don't want to say that you did it because you're so worried I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm not going to do that anymore. So again, it's just, and then just letting it sit with them. They may not own it right away. They won't. Like they may not come be forward with you about it, but we're laying the groundwork to say, in this house, it's okay to make mistakes. You don't have to hide your mistakes from me. And that takes time. I think the girls took them
Mm.
about a year of this being consistent narrative. You're not going to be in trouble. I'm not going to yell. You don't need to tell. In our house, we tell the truth so we can talk about in our family or in our house. But eventually it does start to go down. But it was laying that the safety, I think, emotional safety for mistakes in my
I
home.
love it. Yeah, and I think a couple of things there. So one, in the moment, I love what you're saying there. And the one that I will often use is similar to what you're saying here, but I can tell that this is hard for you to speak about. And often I'll ask them, instead of the why did you do this, which immediately puts people on the defense, is it's can you tell me what happened? And let's say that they lie again. I think that I would give a space and go, this is really hard. Let's try again. Let's do a do-over. Let's
Mhm.
talk about what happened. I think too, so I mean it depends on what age we're looking at again, but I think particularly when that kind of more wishful thinking, so 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, that wishful thinking that you're talking about is happening. I think sometimes parents also, that's the like laying the groundwork, people come in very, very hard. I think that what I would do instead there, instead of going like that's a lie, you didn't see Mickey Mouse running past the window, whatever it is, I think that when we go, okay, this is just wishful thinking. It happens with my daughter Maya. Sometimes she tells me things where I'm like, there's no ways that happened today. um a way to approach that is to really talk about honesty as a family value. So when you see it in books, instead of going directly at what is not true, we talk about when we see honesty in characters in books, in movies. We talk about it at dinner time, why honesty is important. When we look cross-culturally, honesty is a value that is cross-cultural. So we talk about why it's important in our family. We talk about why we sometimes lie or what's happened when we lie. So sometimes I find kind of the soil around it is more important than actually targeting the exact lie. But there are times where we need to come into the exact lie itself. And like Tammy was saying, a lot of that has to do with really creating a space where our kids can be vulnerable with us. And then if and when needed, setting a logical consequence. And I always loved if we can actually put logical consequences in before it actually happens. So if it's something that happens again and again, let's say they keep going to bed with their phone at night, and we talk to them and they lie and they say it's not in their room. We know it's in their room. We wait until the next day. We sit down when everybody's calm and say, this is something that keeps happening again and again. what are your thoughts on what we're going to put in place if you go to bed with your phone and then you say to us that you don't have your phone? And then together we work out what is that consequence going to be. Sometimes I can come up with it with you, sometimes you have to come up with it, but I think if we can put that in place ahead of time, it's always far more impactful.
Yeah, I think people here are talking about discipline. They're like, you're saying to your child in one breath, you won't be in trouble, but at the same time, there's a consequence. I think when you were saying to a child, you won't be in trouble, but then you're going to apply consequence, that is a mixed message. So what we can say instead is, if I am not going to be angry for you telling the truth. So like I think that's the important thing, because I think more or less what our kids are trying to avoid is our anger, is our shame, is the emotional poignancy of how we're delivering the consequence. I think that is more painful to kids than the consequence. And so I think it's fair to say to your child, like, I'm not going to be mad, sweetie, if you just tell me what happened. And then afterwards, you can have a discussion about, like what happens in our home when we break the rules. But Tania said something really key there. You wait. And we have a whole course on discipline, and we talk about this. I rarely deliver consequences in the moment unless we're practicing apologies. But even then, like we wait until the child's lid is back on so they're not so reactive. And so later, if everyone's calm, it doesn't feel like so punitive. Because if we're practicing delivering an apology, or they broke something and they have to, I don't know, use their allowance to buy a new one, or we sit down and have a family meeting about like screen time, that so many people apply a consequence when it's heated. And so it's actually not the consequence that is the problem most of the time. It's the parent's anger in the moment that shuts them down. It's the shame that comes up, that there's your disappointment in that moment, the fear of rejection in the moment. That is what your child is most scared of, is disconnection. So if we are saying we're trying to kind of tease out the truth, and then afterwards we're like, well, we know in our family that we don't lie, and you did hit your sister, and she was really sad. Like, I've had my kids not own something, and I know very well they did it. Like, at that point, as being like, I hear you say that you didn't do that thing, but I have a really sneaking suspicion you don't want to say it because you feel like you're going to get in trouble, or you feel, whatever it is that they're worried about. But I know in my heart that it wasn't your dad and it wasn't me and it wasn't the dog. So we're going to have to talk about what happens when we're calm. So at that point, it's not going to be some huge melodrama about lying. It's going to be, we're going to get down to the root of it, of being like, this is what happens. And hopefully next time, like, you feel safe, you can tell me about that. But, and I've had my kids where someone broke something and I have never found out who did it. So because I don't know and no one's owning it, I'm like, the whole family is going to correct this situation now. And because I never knew, and I just don't stay married to that for too long. It's like there obviously is some shame coming up for them. It's not the hill I'm going to die on, but 3 times out of 4, I can get them to tell the truth. But there's that one time they just won't.
Yeah.
And we can talk about our values, and that's okay. But I don't know if you've had that, but I've had my kids just, no one ever came forward about it. But
Yeah. There was a question earlier about, is our goal really to help our kids to avoid all shame? And I want to come back to that and say it's not. It's okay for our kids, if we say, oh, I recognize that you're not telling me the truth here, whatever it might be, whatever that calm, connect conversation is, it's okay for them to feel shame, but we don't want them to go so far deep down the hole that we're pushing them down, literally feeling that shame that they can't get back up. It's okay for them to dip into that, to go like, oh, what just happened there? But then to have us to help them get out of that hole again. That there's a huge difference. I think that those are probably our main points on lying. We do have for those of you who are part of our community, we have a wonderful script on how to talk to kids when they're lying.
Yeah, and we'll put the link to that below. And someone just, I'll end this with there was one question that came in the question box. It says, if the lie is about the child stealing something small and irrelevant, which is really normal for kids to do, by the way. When my kids, I say they have sticky fingers when they're tiny. Even in our playroom, I don't know, Tanya, I've had toys go missing from my playroom, I don't know how many times. The kids have these little things and they really want them and they can't have them and their impulse control isn't there. And I know when they're tiny, under the age of 6, they don't have great impulse control and they don't have the idea of like in that moment when they want it that badly to say, wait, I could get in trouble for this. This is not a good idea. So it's just like gently reminding them, like, we need to take that back. Like we that is someone else's and we can't take things that don't belong to us. And just like reinforcing that over and over and over. I just can't think of how many things my kids like
Yeah.
shoplifted when they were preschoolers, but I don't like it. That's just what they don't have that same thing. They don't understand the value of money yet. They don't understand the law yet. Like we're expecting these children to understand all these very big moral concepts and legal concepts. Of course they
Mhm.
don't. And they just want the thing. Like they're little, they want the thing.
I'll
So
a quick story about that from my own life. So when I was about 7 years old, there was like a little key ring in a shop, and it had a little soccer boot on. The soccer boot was pink, and I really wanted it. I asked my mom, and she said no. And so I totally took the little key ring. And then my mom found it in my room, surprise, surprise. And she waited till all of my siblings were out of the house very calmly. She came to me and she said, okay, how are we going to make this right? And she helped me. I didn't really write at that time, a little bit, but she helped me to write a letter to the shopkeeper. And I had to take the little boot and the letter, and she came with me. And I had to actually give it to the shopkeeper and say, I'm really, really sorry. And it was such a huge experience that I never, ever stole anything again. But it was done in a way that it internalized the sense of right versus wrong, not shame, not you are a bad kid. Rather, I need to fix what I did here.
well, and that not only you took something that didn't belong to you, your action had an impact on another human being, which you might not have made that connection. You're like, oh, it's a store, but it is someone's livelihood. And like at 7, that's just maybe you can start understanding that. But like it's the same when we apologize. Like if we hurt someone else, and kids might not have that concept right in that moment.